Hello, and welcome to the National Association of Wholesaler-Distributors webinar, Mastering Price Overrides for Enhanced Profit Margins. First, I'd like to thank our sponsor today, SPARXiQ. SPARXiQ solves business challenges by enabling data-driven decisions and equipping frontline sales teams with skills to accelerate results. Working closely together since 2014, SPARXiQ and NAW partner to support its distribution members, our distribution members, with innovative and insightful solutions and resources to accelerate business performance. I am very excited to welcome our guest, David Bauders, who's the CEO of SPARXiQ. David, we've done many of these webinars together, and I always learn something new, and I know that everyone who watches them does too. As CEO of Sparks, David has been committed to helping companies accelerate sales and profitability with the right analytics, tools, and complementary skills training since he founded the company in 1993. Before we begin, a couple things to note. One, if you'd like to ask questions, please submit them via the Q&A function on the bottom of your screen. And also, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted in NAW's digital warehouse, our online resource library. David, what do you have for us today?
Oh, thanks, Patty. So we're going to talk about pricing overrides today. And I think when we scheduled this, maybe we didn't anticipate how timely this presentation would be in terms of the business cycle. So today we're seeing across a lot of sectors of wholesale distribution, a significant amount of margin compression. We're going to talk today about some of the actions that distributors can take to shore up their margins a little bit, even during a weak or difficult economic environment. So just to get into the agenda here, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the statistics on pricing overrides and distribution, just to provide context. We'll look at what are some of the root causes of pricing overrides and how they creep into the business, some of the impact of those. We'll talk about some of the key levers in minimizing overrides or rationalizing them, right-sizing them to help companies to improve their margin performance. We'll talk about the importance of having an effective or accurate pricing system that helps frontline sellers to avoid overrides. And then look closely at how to limit overrides in the less sensitive parts of the business mix. And then we'll have a few other resources to look at as well. So just to really think about the impact of overrides, overrides are really whenever either CSRs or frontline sellers deviate from system pricing. And there's a bunch of reasons that people are opposed to overrides, why they try to limit them. First of all, they create a lot of inconsistency in a distributor's pricing, which can be frustrating to customers, frustrating to salespeople. We also see a significant amount of variability, let's say within a metro area, when different salespeople are overriding prices, then customers learn that they should shop from branch to branch or salesperson to salesperson. We also see that an excessive amount of overrides can really lead to channel conflict with e-commerce and other digital initiatives when customers learn that their pricing is better when they haggle with frontline sellers than using the more efficient channels, digital channels. That creates inefficiency for both customers and distributors. And finally, there's the business impact of overrides, and it is a significant amount of financial erosion that occurs when companies don't manage carefully their pricing overrides. So if you think about one of the most important statistics for everybody attending the webinar today is to understand where is your company's performance on overrides. And there's really two metrics for thinking about overrides. One is what is the percent of revenue that comes from deviated pricing. And the other would be percent of transactions or line item counts that get priced in an override non-system approach. So this is just an example from the electrical industry, for example. The bottom 80% sorry, the bottom 25% of electrical distributors have an 80% override rate. That means 80% or more of their revenue is being priced on the fly by salespeople using some form of cost plus that is unrelated to system pricing. And you can see here what their average gross margin is typically less than 19%, controlling for customer and product mix. We look at the top 25% of electrical distributors, they have 45% or less of their revenue going through at overrides. And typically they'll have over 400 basis points higher average gross margins, roughly doubling the net profitability of the worst performers. So there's a very significant amount of financial performance at stake with being able to manage this override performance number. Similar in plumbing, you can see the gaps here, the 50% or more revenue on plumbing HVAC for the worst quartile, and then the top quartile is less than 30%. And you can see the margins are over 700 basis points greater for the top quartile and over the double the net profitability. So one of the most important statistics that we see over and over again is the lower financial or margin performance of overrides compared to system pricing. So a company that has an effective optimized pricing architecture will see that their overrides are typically between 500 and 1,000 basis points or 5 to 10 margin points lower on their overrides than it is on their structured pricing. And remember that structured pricing could even include contracts and special price agreements. It could be more systematic or matrix type pricing as well. But that gap of 500 to 1,000 basis points means that every 10% of revenue that goes through at overrides is sacrificing between 50 and 100 basis points of overall profitability. So we might ask, well, why do we have overrides? So there's a lot of complexity in distribution in terms of the number of products, number of customers, types of customers, geographies, metro areas, sizes of customer, different types of buyers that we're selling to. And that means it's very hard in a lot of cases to really set pricing structures that are nuanced and tailored to the different market environments or competitive landscapes that distributors sell into. When we have lots of these structures in place that aren't quite dialed in the right way, they're too broad brush in a lot of ways. And that means that there's certain market situations that their pricing system hasn't anticipated. In a lot of cases, the sales team also may believe that setting prices is a core part of their job. And so if they believe that their job is to set prices for their customers, then it's very common for them, even in the presence of system pricing, good system pricing, they'll continue to prefer setting prices themselves. There's also a significant amount of underpricedness in general. And so when we have lots of sales that are sailing through the system at either too high of a margin or too low of a margin, that inconsistency that leaks into the system, into the pricing environment, is very costly in the marketplace. So there's a lot of consequences to this. One of the biggest is, of course, margin leaks, but there's also a consequence to not being able to drive share of wallet with customers. When the pricing is on the fly, it's not structured, it's not analytically based, it's not strategic. There are a lot of customers where share of wallet is underperforming because they don't have effective share gain pricing in place in their system. So some companies have gone very strongly against overrides, and they've tried to even block them altogether. And sometimes that works. A lot of it depends on the market environment that you're selling into. It may depend on the competitive structure of the industry, the amount of value, and the types of buyers that you're selling to. But blocking overrides for most companies in the NAW membership is probably not going to be very effective. There's just too much variability in pricing to be able to have 100% of system pricing in the business. So when we have all this complexity, it really leads to a question, well, how do we start to make progress on overrides? If we can't eliminate them altogether, what's the next best approach? And we're going to talk about a few different approaches to reducing the impact of overrides and the problems from overrides. And there's a few different dimensions to it. So if you think about the challenges, there's really 4 categories of challenges that produce overrides, and where resolving those challenges can help to mitigate or reduce the impact of pricing overrides. The first category is really about the pricing system itself. And for a lot of companies that have had a DIY approach to setting prices, relying on pretty broad brush approaches to setting up customer stratification, understanding product price sensitivity, market price sensitivity, their systems themselves are just not dialed in enough, not high enough resolution to be able to address the diversity of market pressures that their sellers are dealing with. So the first step in making progress on strategic pricing is making sure that the system itself is providing good recommendations that the sales team, if properly trained and with the right incentives, will be able to use for a greater share of the transactions. There's also this whole question of Wild West selling, and this is really under the category of guardrails. When sales teams believe it's fundamentally their job to set prices, and they have had too much freedom delegated to them, this creates a big source of the adversity in pricing overrides. So in that case, some of the most important solutions are about figuring out where should they have more discretion, and conversely, where should that discretion be limited or blocked altogether. There's also behavioral causes of overrides. This is where sales teams lack the training, lack the disciplines to negotiate effectively with their customers. We know that in general, over 90% of professional buyers have been trained in how to negotiate effectively. Less than 10% of sellers have had a structured, focused program on professional negotiation skills. And so in some cases where the cause is more behavioral, we can upskill the sales team, do simulations, help them to build up their skills to be less discounters and more value sellers. And then finally, the incentives out there are an important layer, making sure that the sales team's compensation structure is not incenting bad behavior. In many cases, distributors are paying a percentage of GP dollars that their sellers generate, and they hope that that'll get them to manage their pricing more effectively. That unfortunately is not the case. There's almost no correlation between gross margin incentive-based salespeople and their override rates versus those who don't have that incentive. So that behavior, because of risk aversion on the part of salespeople, they happily will give away margin every day to try to increase what they believe is their probability of winning. So depending on where these pricing overrides are originating, what the root cause is, there can be a variety of different approaches to help overcome them. So we talked about the importance of getting the system pricing right as a starting point. And one of the things that companies do over and over and over again is fail to anticipate from a buyer's perspective what is the actual sensitivity of the different products that their customers buy. Over and over again, they'll use inappropriate inward-facing metrics of things like inventory turns or how much they sell of a particular product to try to guide their differences in pricing. So instead, we believe it's much better to take an approach based on buyer-centric measures or drivers of price sensitivity. Some of them you see here that help you to really differentiate within the pricing system. Where should you be more or less aggressive on price? And when you take a buyer-centric approach, it makes it much easier for your sellers because we've anticipated correctly how customers will react to different prices based on their criteria, not the company's inward-facing criteria. So pricing system is very complex, but at a very basic level, we have to be able to describe to the sales team how we differentiate pricing. And these are just some of the attributes that an effective pricing system would incorporate. There's obviously the SKU level sensitivity or product family, visibility of different product categories or SKUs within categories. And then there are different metrics of customer size, either actual or potential, as well as the customer's type, which could be a behavioral cluster of how they buy. It could be based on major consumption patterns that we see in the marketplace. But ultimately, we have to be able to describe to the sales team what the drivers of pricing are for them to have trust in the system. And trust in the system is one of the foundations of reducing pricing overrides. So generating this accurate system price is critical to generating trust, also generating adoption. There's a few different layers of, for a typical distributor, of being able to adjust their pricing. The first question is whether they should be on a cost or list less basis, cost plus or list less. We have cost adders or list price adders, which we call PUF, which can help to normalize the pricing based on differences in cost to serve or based on the item sensitivity of a particular SKU. There's also adjustments for product family visibility or competitive pressure, and then adjustments for different customer segment and geographic segment variables in the marketplace. So getting these different layers, each of these different layers right, is one of the keys to having a trustworthy and profitable pricing system. If you think about the whole question of overrides, one of the biggest challenges for distributors is to really measure their current state, understanding how much of their pricing is coming from customer specific or price or contract-based pricing versus system or matrix pricing, which would be more generalized pricing, versus overrides. And as we talked about earlier, this pricing methods mix is extremely important. So for companies that haven't really rationalized their pricing, where it's been more sales-led and less analytically grounded, there's often a lot more revenue showing up in CSP and overrides than there would be if they optimized it. On the right side, you can see a typical example of a company that's really taken a more analytically based approach. They've implemented best practice systems and tools to be able to rationalize their pricing to be much less dependent on pricing overrides. One of the things we know from customer specific and contract pricing is that salespeople, when they're the ones leading the process, make a significant amount of mistakes in terms of how they set up contracts and special price agreements. As you can see from this matrix, there's a significant amount of the products that get loaded into the contract that are correct. In the upper left, we see about 36% of items that were sold were correctly put on contract. Unfortunately, there was about 31% of the total items bought that should not have been on the contract. They weren't predictable. They weren't high sensitivity to the buyer. They would have been more profitably left off contract. There's about 16% of sales in the lower right where the sales team correctly understood that they should be non-contract, non-declared spend parts of the agreement. Unfortunately, in the upper right, we can see there were a lot of products the customer bought where, because of cherry picking with the competitor, the salesperson didn't understand that they should have been on contract. And when they fail to put it on contract, they typically end up with pricing that's too high and that underperforms from a share of wallet perspective. So helping the sales teams to really understand contract strategy and being able to get the right items in or out of contracts is one of the keys to optimizing system pricing. And really understanding where customer specific or contract pricing makes sense. So you think about different customer tiers, typically are assigned accounts, medium, large, or huge. We can use that nomenclature. The visibility of different product families. These are all different layers where contract pricing may or may not make sense. And so, or the CSP pricing for that matter. So really understanding what should be preserved on contract, what should be off contract or off agreement is super important in terms of optimizing margin and also share of wallet. So we talked a little bit about optimizing the pricing system. That's one of the big keys here. There's another key, which is really how do we start to clamp down on overrides using tools within the ERP system. And really, this is about identifying where are the most wasteful overrides in the business, where even though sales teams perhaps should have pricing discretion in certain parts of the business mix, there's a lot of other areas where, frankly, they don't know what they're doing and they're sacrificing a lot of profitability. Here's just a couple of examples. A $300 million electrical distributor had about $16 million in sales of low sensitivity items to tiny and small customers. Because of the overrides, they left almost $6 million on the table, over 197 basis points relative to their bottom line. Right side, you can see a fluid power distributor, $90 million in revenue. They've left almost $13 million on the table on their C&D items being sold to tiny and small customers. So these are just some of the mathematics of overrides and how serious the overrides in low sensitivity parts of the business mix can be. That just gives you a little bit of an overview of what we're doing here, trying to improve overrides. We do have a free ebook for NAW members if you'd like to get a hold of that, so you can start to better understand and manage your override situation. Some of the 4 key steps, again, optimize the system so the sales team can trust it, upskill the sales team to cut down on the caving in of customer haggling behaviors, placing appropriate limits in the ERP system, and then aligning your incentives. So with that, we will open it up to questions.
Thank you so much, David. That was great. We do have a few questions. The first one is, what are the biggest barriers to success?
I would say the number one barrier is having the courage to actually find out what is the current state and how much money is being left on the table. And then being willing to talk with the sales teams about what are the behaviors that are behind all of this. In a lot of cases, companies are unwilling to address the tension between sales and finance. And frankly, they just let things go on and on and on because they don't want to roll up their sleeves and really dig into this type of a situation. So I'd say it's probably the conflict is mostly between finance and sales. The second is they don't get granular enough about what they're trying to accomplish. They speak in generalities as if it's an all or nothing type of situation, and they overlook obvious practical steps that they can take to get started.
Thank you. We have a question from Chris, and Chris asks, what are the best strategies for determining where to apply the guardrails and the margin minimums?
Well, this is where you have to get granular. And frankly, you have to have good metrics of both item and product category level sensitivity and visibility. You also have to have effective customer segmentation. So if you think about where are the best areas to allow overrides, it would tend to be in highly competitive, highly sensitive product families being sold to actively managed customers, where salespeople have a good understanding of the dynamics of wallet share with their customers, where they have a good understanding of the buyer, being able to engage with the buyer, and where they have a legitimate competitive environment. Conversely, the areas that are most wasteful will be unassigned accounts, where nobody really knows what the competitive pressures are. Those are typically CSR driven. and also in the least sensitive product families and least competitive SKUs that are being sold. So if you think about it as that continuum, you want to allow more discretion where the discretion is reasonably fact-based and where people actually can negotiate, and you want to restrict it at the opposite end of the spectrum. And restriction can mean either blocking it altogether, or it can mean limiting the percent deviation from the system price, or perhaps enforcing margin minimums if that's an angle that makes sense.
We have a very interesting question, very timely. How is AI and machine learning changing your analytic approach, and where do you see this headed?
Well, there's a number of limitations with AI and ML when it comes to pricing. One of the most tricky parts of it is that if we want our pricing system to anticipate the behaviors of salespeople, then if we study what salespeople do, we can actually train the machine to do the wrong things. So AI and ML can be used in certain systems. Let's say we have a quote tracking system where we can actually gauge buyer behaviors and understand and predict and prescribe what are the actions on the part of the seller that have a properly and informed data set of buyer reactions and that sort of thing. On the other hand, if we don't have that, in a lot of cases, the AI or ML will take us in the wrong direction. So a big part of it is really defining the problem and then determining the appropriate data set.
That actually, this brings us to the next good question that is ties into this. It's who should lead the effort then? You know, you talked about the sales team versus finance team. Now you're talking about AI, which brings in the tech people. And so who should be leading this effort within the company?
I would say, generally speaking, it needs to be somebody in the sales organization, somebody who has enough footing in profitability and let's say has their incentives tied strongly enough to be able to navigate the pressures in the marketplace. It takes an understanding, a solid analytical foundation. You need somebody who understands the layers that we've been talking about in this webinar, understanding that it's not an all or nothing type of proposition, and somebody who has the knowledge of customers and markets and commercial situations to be able to articulate why the strategy that's developed is worthy of adoption by the sales team. And that's not always easy, but it is worth going through the trouble to sort out.
I have one last question. There's a lot of really good questions today, which is wonderful, very engaged audience. How long does it take to make progress with the overrides?
So there's a few different layers to this. If you think about the system layer, getting the system right, that's typically about a 90-day cycle to analyze data and then to be able to build a pricing architecture that will predictably yield good prices that are worthy of sales trust and business performance. You think about the opposite end of the spectrum, training salespeople to negotiate more effectively, to stop haggling with their customers. That's typically about an 8-week to 12-week exercise with focused negotiation training, with case studies, with doing simulations, role play, things like that, to be able to have those aha moments that help sellers to realize, okay, they really can up their game and start to make a difference. Some of the changes, though, are much faster than that. We can put in very tailored guardrails within the ERP system that could make a difference literally within a day. So it really depends on what part of the challenge we're trying to resolve.
Okay, I lied. We have one last question. Someone snuck in, but this really does have to be the last one. Mike asks, do you see a point of diminishing returns when it comes to limiting overrides? So if we're already in the 10 to 15% range, is there still a case for improvement that doesn't over limit our teams and start to affect overall revenue?
I'd say if you're at 10 to 15%, you're doing pretty well. Probably your challenges are elsewhere. You know, for example, is your system pricing truly optimized? When you have that high of a level of adoption, that can often mean that you're just leaving money on the table broadly. So I'd probably focus less on the latter part of that and more on the upstream.
Well, oh, we got one more question, do we? Oh, they just said thank you. So, you're welcome. And I want to say thank you. We're going to wrap it up now, David, but thank you again I know that you're very busy. And it's just great whenever you can take time to talk to the distributors who tune in to these webinars. And thank you for the generous partnership and investment that SPARXiQ makes in NAW and our membership. I know that that people are better for it, and it's just a great thing to experience and watch grow through the years. And with that, is NAW's mission for everyone is to transform the wholesale distribution industry. And that begins with all of you. So please contact us to learn more about the services, events, educational resources like this today, innovation, and advocacy NAW provides for our members and the industry as a whole. David, thank you again.
Thanks, everyone.
And thank you all for tuning in. And I hope everyone has a wonderful day.
Happy holiday weekend too. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.